Hi everyone, welcome back to Engineering Simplified. I am Zain Khan, and in this video we are going to talk about two things. First, the sub function in Matlab, and secondly, nested functions in Matlab. But before we talk about those, let me tell you two ways of using functions in Matlab. The first way is that you have a main program such as here and a function as two separate files. So you have two separate files for the one for the function, one for the main program, and within the main program you give a call to the function and it executes. The other way of doing it is that you just have one main program such as this one, and within the main program you write the function at the bottom of it. And just like before, you call the function, it accesses the function, it knows that the function is going to be at the bottom, it accesses the function and the code executes. Let me show you the example of both of these. So the first one is this, my main program. So within the main program I can see that here is the function call. So what this program does is it first asks the user for an input, it stores it into the variable x, then it passes the variable x as an input argument to this function, doubling the number. Now this function, the doubling the number, is stored in the same folder as the main program. So it goes into this, the function, and here it just multiplies whatever I pass as an input argument by 2. It outputs the value, and the output value gets stored in y, and then it is displayed to the user. Let me run this function. So here it asks me to enter a number, let's say 25, and it gives me 50. So this is the first way. You have the function written as a separate .m file, your main code written as a separate .m file, and you access the function by calling it from the main program. The second way, which is much simpler, is this one. So in this, what you do is, if I drag it down, what you do is you have this main program here, and the function is written at the bottom of the main program only. So there's just one .m file right here. So the function works just like before. It asks the user for a number, it doubles it by calling this function right here, which is this one, and then it prints the output. Running this one, if I write 30, I get 60 as the output. So this is the two ways of writing functions and calling them in Matlab. Now moving to what are subfunctions and nested functions in Matlab. Now to talk about subfunctions first, what a subfunction is, there is just one .m file, and within the .m file you write multiple functions in that single .m file, just like here. So here, this is known as, the first function is known as my primary function, and all the functions that are written after it, this one and this one, are going to be known as the subfunctions. So only the primary function can be accessed from outside this .m file. So only the primary function can be accessed from outside this function file. So in order to access this, I would need to access this only. I cannot access this or this function. So I can only access this function. Now another thing to note is that all of the functions and the sum functions have their independent workspace. So that means is that the variables which have been created and are used in one function are not going to be automatically accessible to the other function unless I pass it on as an input argument. So if I go through this function, so this is the mean and double function, which takes in u, which can be an array. First it calculates the length of u using the built-in Matlab function. It stores it in n. Then it calls the mean function, which is this one, and it passes u and n as an input argument to this mean function. Even though it is a sub function, but the sub functions do not share the same variable, so you would need to pass your input arguments and whatever variables you need to play around with to the sub functions, since they have independent workspaces. So here I pass u and n to it. What it does, it just sums x, divides it by n to get the mean. It outputs it. The output gets stored in the average variable. Then it calls the other function, which is doubling, and passes the u to it. So the doubling, what it does is it just multiplies every element of it by 2 and it outputs it. So let me just call this function and see what happens. So, and I call this function with an array of, let's say, 1 3 5. I press enter and I get 3, which is the first output argument. Now in order to get both the output arguments, what I would need to do is I would need to define two output variables, let's say a and b, and here I get the first, which is the average, I get as 3, and the 2 times I get as 2 6 and 10. Now this is what we call sub function in Matlab. Now there's another thing which is called the nested function in Matlab, which is this one. So what happens is, in nested functions you only have one main function within the .m file, and all the other functions are written within the definition of the main function, such as this one. So there is one main function and I have two nested functions written inside it. Now notice that they are written inside of this function, while before they were written independently. So now the two functions are written inside of this main function. The advantage of doing this is that once you have written nested functions, then the nested functions are able to access the variables of the main function. So they share a common workspace. So the advantage of doing it in this case is that I do not need to pass on the input arguments to the nested functions anymore. Just like before, I first calculated n and then I just call the mean function, and it already knows what u is, what n is, since it shares the same workspace, and it calculates the output here. And then I call doubling, it again knows what u is since it shares the same workspace, and it calculates output 2 and it gives me 2 times and I get these two outputs. Let me call this one now. So I would call this one now with the same input argument. Again, I get the first output argument since I haven't defined the two output arguments that I want. So I write a and b. And when I press enter, I get 3 as my first output argument, which is the average, and b, which is 2 times as 2 6 and 10. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe the video, and as always, see you in the next video.